Hello and welcome. Today we're going to dive deep into one of the most beautiful, but also one of the most controversial and misunderstood colors in the entire Cane Corso world, the straw color, or Paglia Cane Corso. It's a color that has these incredible historical roots, but it's stuck right in the middle of a very modern debate. So let's unpack the real science and the history behind this amazing dog.
You know, it's funny you bring this up. As someone who's really been looking into getting a Corso, you hear all kinds of crazy warnings about these straw-colored dogs. I mean, I've literally been told, stay away from them, they're basically albino, and that the light color is somehow directly tied to major health issues, especially deafness. Is any of that true?
That is the absolute core of the controversy. And honestly, it's all based on a total misunderstanding of how coat color genetics actually work. The straw color comes from a place on the DNA we call the E locus, and specifically a combination we call E/E. The key thing to understand here is that this gene is not a defect. It doesn't delete pigment or cause albinism. Think of it more like a pigment switch. All the E/E form does is it tells the hair follicles to stop making black pigment, that's eumelanin, and instead start making yellow or red pigment, that's pheomelanin. And the most important part? This only affects the coat. The dog still has plenty of black pigment in its skin, its nose, its eye rims, everywhere else it's supposed to.
Right, so here's the simplest way to think about it. This isn't some bizarre, dangerous mutation unique to Corsos. It is the exact same, completely normal gene that gives us yellow Labrador retrievers. A black lab has the on switch for black pigment. A yellow lab has the off switch. That's all this is. It's basic, well-understood canine genetics, not some kind of flaw.
Okay, the lab comparison makes a ton of sense, but that warning about deafness just seems so specific. Where in the world does that come from? That is a fantastic question, and this chart really clears up the confusion. See, deafness that's linked to coat color is a very real thing in some breeds, but it's caused by totally different genes. Look here at the table. Genes like Merle and Piebald can cause deafness because their mechanism is to actually delete pigment cells or stop them from getting where they need to go when the puppy is developing. And it turns out those specific pigment cells are crucial for the inner ear to work correctly. Now look at the E locus, the gene for our straw Corso. Its mechanism isn't deletion, it just redirects the type of pigment. The cells are all there, they're healthy, they're in the ear, doing their job. The result? Absolutely zero associated risk of deafness.
So, if it's perfectly healthy, where did this color even come from? It feels like it must have a real story behind it. Oh, it absolutely does. This color has a purely functional origin, which is why it was so common for centuries in rural Italy. These dogs were known as cane da pagliaio. It literally translates to straw stack dog. You have to remember, on the old farms in southern Italy, straw wasn't just bedding. It was a critical, valuable resource for feed, for building materials, everything. Guarding those giant straw stacks was a serious job, and a light-colored dog that blended in perfectly with the straw was the ultimate camouflage against thieves.
And this is so important to grasp. Cane da pagliaio wasn't a different breed. It was a job description. Back then, these dogs were selected for what they could do, not for a specific, rigid look. You had your straw stack specialists, your general farm guardians, your tough cattle-driving dogs. They were all cane corsos, just bred for different tasks. The color was just another tool in the toolbox for that specific job.
And you know, we don't have to guess about any of this. We have historical records straight from the source. This account here from an Italian farmer, which is kept in the official ENCI archive, says it all. The light fawn dog was preferred. You could only see its movement. It was deliberately chosen for this. I mean, it doesn't get any clearer than that. This was not an accident, and it certainly wasn't a defect. It was a desired, functional, selected trait.
Now, a huge amount of what we know about the true diversity of the original Cane Corso comes from this man, Vito Indiviri. A lot of people credit Paolo Breber for the breed's recovery, and he was important. But the Italian sources are very clear that Indiviri was the man on the ground. He was a livestock merchant who traveled all over the countryside in the 70s. And he was the one who systematically took pictures and documented the real working dogs he found on the farms, before any official standard was even a thought. His work is the actual visual proof of what this breed really was.
Okay, so if the color was historical, it was functional, and you have the photographs to prove it, why in the world was it banned from the breed standard? Why is it considered a disqualifying fault today? That really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer really is just a gap in knowledge at a critical time. Just look at this timeline. So in the 1980s, when Dr. Morsiani is writing the very first standard, well, there are no DNA tests. They didn't have the science we have now. They saw a fawn dog without a black mask, and based on the limited knowledge they had, they made an assumption.
They figured it must be some form of albinism, a defect. So they wrote the standard to require a black mask on all fawn dogs, which by default excludes the straw color. The crazy part is, even though by 2015 we had the full genetic picture and knew that original assumption was wrong, the standard has just never been updated. It's just institutional inertia.
And the irony here is just staggering. The genes for this banned color were right there at the very foundation of the breed's official recovery. There was a well-documented light fawn male named Tapo di Ortanova. He was one of the original dogs that they found. He was placed with farmers and breeders and spread his E/E genes all over the region. His DNA is part of the original foundational gene pool, only to be basically written out of history and scrubbed from pedigrees later on just to make them fit this new flawed standard.
And you know, genetically speaking, the straw color is actually a little more nuanced than most people think. It's all built on that E/E foundation, but other genes can modify the pigment on the nose and skin. So the most common version you'll see has a black nose and black skin pigment, just like a yellow lab. But if a dog also happens to carry the right genes for brown or for dilute, you can get these rarer variations with a liver-colored nose or even a gray one. They're all genetically straw, just with different finishing touches.
So this really just boils it all down. On one side of the line, you have biology. You have undisputed genetic science, you have clear historical function, and you have a total lack of any health risks. And on the other side, you have policy. A man-made rule book written before we had DNA, based on a completely wrong guess that's just been stuck in place for decades because, well, that's just the way it's been. It's a classic battle of science versus bureaucracy.
Wow, this has been unbelievably eye-opening. So for anybody out there who loves this breed, what's the big takeaway? What's the most important thing to remember from all this? The most crucial point is this: color does not equal health. A breed standard is a policy document. It's a set of aesthetic guidelines written by a committee. Genetics are biological fact. Instead of judging a dog based on a color that was misunderstood 40 years ago, we should be focusing on the things that actually matter: documented health testing, a rock-solid stable temperament, and preserving the true, complete genetic and historical legacy of this incredible working breed. Always, always test the genetics first, and let the facts, not some outdated rules, be your guide.